The blizzard should have killed them both, but 3,000 pounds of panicked cattle and a woman who refused to quit changed everything. This is the story of Eliza Hart, a seamstress from Boston who society called too big for love, too soft for the frontier. They were wrong. When she stepped off that train into the frozen heart of Montana, she had one bag, no experience, and a marriage contract with a stranger. What happened in the next 72 hours would either forge an unbreakable bond or bury them both in the snow. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train's whistle cut through the December air like a blade through silk, sharp and final. Eliza Hart pressed her gloved hand against the frost-crusted window of the rail car, watching the landscape transform from the familiar brick and cobblestone of civilization into something vast, white, and utterly merciless. Montana stretched before her like a blank page, beautiful, terrifying, and completely indifferent to whether she survived it. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, round face, full cheeks that had earned her whispers and sideways glances her entire life. Dark eyes that had learned to hold steady when the world wanted her to look away. At 26, Eliza had heard every variation of the same cruel song. Too heavy. Too much. Not quite right. The aunts in Boston had made it an art form, their voices dripping with concern that barely masked contempt. Perhaps if you ate less bread, dear. No man wants a wife he can't lift. Have you considered that your condition might be why you're still unmarried? She'd stitched wedding gowns for women half her skill and twice her fortune. She'd hemmed christening gowns for babies born to marriages built on money rather than affection. And every night, she'd return to a boarding house room that smelled of cabbage and resignation, wondering if the whispers were right, if she was simply too much woman for any man to want. Then she'd seen the advertisement. It had been tucked between notices for farmhands and livestock sales in the Boston Evening Transcript. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for escape. Wanted. Wife for Montana rancher. Must be strong, practical, and willing to work. Appearance matters less than character. Those seeking easy luxury need not apply. Reply to C. Mercer, Alder Creek Station, Montana Territory. She'd read it 17 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to write a response. The correspondence that followed had been sparse, practical, almost businesslike. Caleb Mercer wrote in short sentences that suggested a man more comfortable with cattle than conversation. He owned 200 acres in the Paradise Valley. He raised beef cattle. He needed a partner, not a decoration. He asked about her skills. Could she sew, cook, manage accounts? He asked if she feared isolation, hard winters, harder work. He never once asked her weight. She told him the truth in her third letter, the words feeling like broken glass in her throat. I should tell you that I am a large woman, not in height, but in build. If this changes your mind, I will understand. His response had arrived 10 days later. Miss Hart, I need someone who won't break under pressure. The frontier doesn't care about Boston's beauty standards. Can you ride a horse? Can you think clearly when things go wrong? Can you stand your ground? Those are the questions that matter here. That letter was folded in her coat pocket now, worn soft from being read and reread during the 4-day journey west. It had become a kind of talisman, proof that somewhere in this vast country there might be a place where she was enough exactly as she was. The train began to slow, brakes screaming against iron wheels. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window she could see the station, if you could call it that. A wooden platform, a small shelter barely worthy of the name, and beyond it, nothing but snow and mountains and sky that went on forever. And on that platform, a single figure, Caleb Mercer. Even from a distance, she could read the lines of him, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He stood with the stillness of a man accustomed to waiting, to watching, to measuring the world before acting. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his breath visible in the crystalline air. The train lurched to a complete stop. Around Eliza, the few other passengers began gathering their belongings. A merchant with sample cases, a young couple holding each other tightly, their whispered goodbyes carrying the weight of separation. No one else was disembarking at Alder Creek. Eliza reached for her bag, a small leather case that held everything she owned. 3 dresses she'd made herself, cut to fit a body that dressmakers refused to accommodate. Undergarments. A packet of sewing needles and thread. A daguerreotype of her mother, dead now 6 years. A small book of poetry. The marriage contract, unsigned, that Caleb had sent her. Not much to show for 26 years of living. The conductor, a weathered man with sympathetic eyes, appeared at her seat. "Alder Creek, miss. You certain about this?" She met his gaze. "I'm certain." "Long way from Boston." "That's rather the point." He nodded slowly, then offered his hand to help her stand. The aisle seemed narrower than it had 4 days ago, or perhaps she was simply more aware of the way her hips brushed against the seats as she moved. She'd learned long ago to hold her chin up when moving through spaces designed for smaller women, to claim room rather than apologize for taking it. The cold hit her like a fist the moment she stepped between cars. Montana winter was nothing like Boston winter. This was colder, cleaner, sharp enough to make her lungs ache. She paused at the top of the steps, one hand gripping the rail, looking down at the platform where Caleb Mercer stood waiting. This was it, the moment where he'd see her fully, not just words on a page, but flesh and bone, and all the reality that came with her. The moment where men's eyes usually changed, where politeness became pity or worse. Eliza descended the steps carefully, mindful of ice. Her boots, good Boston leather, purchased with 3 months' savings, crunched against packed snow. She stepped onto the platform and walked toward him, bag in hand, spine straight. Caleb Mercer pulled his hands from his pockets. They stood perhaps 8 feet apart, studying each other with the intensity of people whose futures now depended on this moment. Eliza forced herself not to look away, not to hunch her shoulders, not to make herself smaller. She'd done that her entire life in Boston. She wouldn't start her new life that way. He was older than she'd imagined from his letters, 34 she knew, but his face carried the extra years that hard living carves into a man. Weathered skin, strong jaw, eyes the color of winter sky. Handsome, she supposed, though in a rough-hewn way that had nothing to do with parlor manners. His hands, when he'd pulled them from his pockets, were scarred and calloused. Working hands. "Miss Hart." His voice was low, slightly rough, as if he didn't use it often. "Mr. Mercer." He looked at her, really looked, his gaze steady and direct, and she braced herself for the change she knew was coming. The disappointment, the regret, the polite words that would somehow wound deeper than honest cruelty. But his expression didn't change. "Train was on time," he said. "That's rare this time of year." "I wouldn't know. First time in Montana." "Last time in Montana, if you change your mind. I'll buy you a return ticket, no questions asked." "I didn't come here to turn back." Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "Wagon's just over there. It's a 2-hour drive to the ranch. We should get moving. There's weather coming in tonight." He reached for her bag. She hesitated for just a second, a lifetime of having men treat her belongings roughly, as if handling things for a woman they found unattractive was a burden, then released it. Caleb took it without effort, turned, and started walking toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. Eliza followed, her breath clouding the air, her heart still thundering. He hadn't smiled, hadn't frowned, hadn't shown any reaction at all to her size, her face, any of it. She didn't know if that was better or worse than outright rejection. The wagon was simple but well maintained, a working vehicle, not made for comfort. Caleb secured her bag in the back, then turned and, without asking, offered his hand to help her up to the seat. She took it. His grip was firm, steady. He didn't grunt with effort or make any show of her weight as she climbed up. Just helped her, then moved around to the driver's side and swung himself up with practiced ease. "There's a blanket behind the seat if you need it," he said, gathering the reins. "Gets colder once we're moving." "Thank you." He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward, pulling them away from the station, away from the train that was already preparing to continue its journey west, away from anything familiar. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes. Nothing but the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the whisper of wind across snow. The landscape was overwhelming in its emptiness. White fields broken by dark stands of pine, mountains rising in the distance like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. It's beautiful, Eliza said finally, surprising herself. Caleb glanced at her. You think so? Doesn't everyone? Most people from back east think it's empty, lonely. It is empty. That doesn't mean it isn't beautiful. He made a sound that might have been agreement, might have been something else. They rode on. Storm's coming, he said after another stretch of silence, nodding toward the northwestern sky where clouds were building, dark and heavy. Should hit sometime after midnight. Could be bad. How bad? Bad enough that I almost sent a telegram telling you to wait until spring. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Seemed wrong to make that choice for you. Eliza turned that over in her mind. The advertisement said you needed a wife who could work. What exactly does that mean? Means the ranch doesn't run itself. Means there's always something that needs doing. Cattle to feed, repairs to make, accounts to keep. Means I can't afford a wife who expects to sit in the parlor doing needlework while I do everything else. I've worked every day of my life, Mr. Mercer. I'm not afraid of labor. Not the same kind of work, though. No, she admitted. Not the same kind. But I can learn. Can you? He wasn't challenging her, just asking. Because there's no quitting once winter sets in. No taking the next train back to Comfort when things get hard. I didn't leave Comfort, Eliza said, her voice sharper than she intended. I left a boarding house room where I shared a bed with 2 other women. I left 12-hour days at a sewing machine that left my fingers bleeding. I left a city where every conversation reminded me that I wasn't quite good enough, quite pretty enough, quite small enough to deserve respect. Caleb's jaw tightened. That why you answered the advertisement? Running from something? I'm running towards something. There's a difference. He studied her profile for a long moment, then returned his attention to the road. Fair enough. More silence. The cold was seeping through Eliza's coat now, making her fingers ache. She reached behind the seat and found the blanket, wool, heavy, smelling faintly of horse and pine smoke. She wrapped it around herself. Can I ask you something? She said. Suppose you'd better. We're about to be married. Why didn't my size matter to you? Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice stayed level. Lost my wife 5 years ago, Sarah. She was small, delicate. Everyone said she was beautiful, and she was. Beautiful and fragile as glass. He paused, something painful crossing his face. This land broke her. The isolation, the work, the winters. She got sick the second year, fever, and there wasn't anything I could do. She was gone in 3 days. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. Beauty doesn't keep you alive out here. Strength does. Character does. I need a partner who won't shatter when things get hard. Someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated and refuses to accept it. Eliza's throat tightened. And you think I'm that person? Your letters suggested it, but I won't know for sure until the first real test. Which will be? He nodded toward the darkening clouds. Probably tonight. They reached the ranch just as the sun was touching the western mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and amber. The house was smaller than Eliza had imagined, a cabin, really, made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney from which smoke was rising. There was a barn, a corral, with several horses, and beyond that, nothing but open range. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, then grabbed her bag. I'll show you inside. You can have the bedroom. I've been sleeping in the main room anyway. The cabin's interior was spare but clean. A main room with a cast-iron stove, a rough table and 2 chairs, hooks for coats, a shelf with a few books. A bedroom to one side, barely large enough for the bed, and a small dresser. Everything was functional, nothing was decorative. It's not much, Caleb said, setting her bag on the bed. It's honest, Eliza replied. I appreciate that. He nodded. I need to see to the horses and check the herd before the storm hits. There's coffee on the stove if you want it, food in the cupboard. Make yourself, he hesitated over the word, home. Then he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the center of a cabin that was supposed to become her life. She moved through the space slowly, taking inventory. The stove was warm, well-tended. The shelves held basic supplies, flour, coffee, dried beans, salt. The bedroom was almost monastic in its simplicity. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs, setting her mother's daguerreotype on the dresser. Through the window, she could see Caleb moving between the barn and the corral, his movements efficient and purposeful. He worked like a man who'd long ago learned that survival depended on completing tasks before darkness fell. Eliza found the coffee, poured herself a cup, and stood at the window watching the storm clouds roll closer. They were massive, bruised-looking things that seemed to swallow the sky. The temperature was dropping. She could feel it even through the cabin walls. She'd made her choice, signed the papers at the station, watched Caleb fold them into his coat pocket. They'd agreed to marry at the church in town on Christmas Day, 3 days from now. Until then, she was, what? Guest? Future wife? Partner? The wind picked up, rattling the windows. Caleb came through the door in a rush of cold air and urgency. Storm's coming faster than I thought. Could hit in an hour, maybe less. What do we need to do? He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face, as if he'd expected her to ask what he needed to do. Herds in the far pasture. They need to be moved to shelter before the storm hits full force, or we'll lose half of them to the cold. Then we should go. It's dangerous if we get caught out there. You said you needed a partner. Partners don't stay inside when there's work to be done. For the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Caleb Mercer smiled. It was small, barely there, but real. Can you ride? I've ridden exactly 3 times, all in parks. That's not riding, but there's no time to teach you properly. He grabbed a heavy coat from a peg, held it out to her. Put this on over yours. Wear these gloves. Keep your head down against the wind. And when I tell you to hold on, you hold on like your life depends on it, because it will. Eliza pulled on the coat, too large but warm, and the gloves. Her heart was racing, fear mixing with something else. Exhilaration, maybe. Purpose. They went out into the gathering darkness together. The wind was already fierce, carrying stinging particles of ice. Caleb led her to the barn where 2 horses were already saddled. He'd been preparing to go alone, she realized. This is Steady, he said, indicating a gray mare. She's the calmest horse I've got. I'm going to help you up. Then I need you to do exactly what I say. Stay behind me, follow where I go. If you get disoriented, trust the horse. She knows the way home. What if I fall? Try not to. It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. Caleb helped her into the saddle with the same matter-of-fact efficiency he'd shown all day. No judgment about her needing extra help, no comments about her weight, just firm hands and clear instructions. Then he swung onto his own horse, a large bay gelding, and looked back at her. You sure about this? Eliza tightened her grip on the reins. I didn't come all this way to hide inside when things get difficult. All right then. Stay close. They rode out into the wind. The world transformed around them. What had been merely cold became savage. The wind howled like something alive and hunting, driving snow that hadn't been falling 5 minutes ago. Eliza hunched over the horse's neck, her face burning with cold, her hands aching even through the gloves. Caleb rode ahead, sure and steady, occasionally looking back to make sure she was still there. The visibility dropped until she could barely see him, just the dark shape of horse and rider appearing and disappearing in the whiteout. Terror climbed up her throat. This was insane. She was going to die out here, freeze to death on her first day in Montana, and they'd find her body in the spring, and everyone back in Boston would say they'd known she wasn't capable, that she'd been foolish to think, "Hold on!" Caleb's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. She gripped the saddle horn with both hands. They descended into what must have been a ravine, the horses picking their way down a slope Eliza couldn't see. She trusted Steady, trusted the mare's sure-footedness, trusted Caleb who'd promised these animals knew the way home. Then the ground leveled, and through the driving snow she saw them, dark shapes moving restlessly, the low sound of cattle calling to each other. Caleb rode among them, his voice rising above the wind, calling, directing. Eliza watched him work, watched him move the herd with nothing but voice and presence. This was a man who knew his animals, who'd earned their trust. "We need to move them north," he shouted to her. "To Windbreak Canyon. Stay on the western flank. Keep them from drifting." Eliza had no idea what that meant, but she rode where he pointed, and when a few cattle started to break away from the group, she rode at them, the way she'd seen Caleb do. To her amazement, they turned back. They moved the herd through the storm, through cold that made every breath painful, through visibility so poor that Eliza sometimes couldn't see the cattle right in front of her. She lost all sense of time. There was only the wind, the snow, the need to keep moving. At some point she realized she was crying, tears freezing on her cheeks. Her hands had gone numb. Her thighs ached from gripping the horse. Every part of her screamed to stop, to rest, to surrender. But Caleb kept going, and so she did too. Finally, hours later, or maybe just minutes, she couldn't tell, they drove the herd into a canyon where high rock walls broke the worst of the wind. The cattle settled, pressing together for warmth. Caleb rode back to her, his face barely visible beneath ice-crusted hat and scarf. "You all right?" She tried to answer, found her jaw too frozen to work properly, managed a nod. "Canyon will protect them. We need to get back before we can't find the way." The ride back was worse. The storm had fully hit now, a howling fury that seemed determined to erase them from the world. Eliza wrapped her arms around Steady's neck and let the horse follow Caleb's mount. She couldn't feel her hands anymore, couldn't feel her feet. The cold had moved past pain into a strange numbness that was almost worse. She thought about Boston, about her warm boarding house room that had seemed so terrible, about the sewing shop with its coal stove, about how she'd complained about 12-hour workdays when she'd been warm and dry and alive. What had she done? Caleb's horse stopped. Through the snow, she could barely make out the shape of the barn. They'd made it. Caleb dismounted, came to her side. "Eliza, need you to let go of the horse." She tried. Her arms wouldn't obey. "I'm going to help you." His voice was calm, steady. "Just trust me." He reached up, and she felt his hands on her waist, pulling her down from the saddle. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground. She would have fallen if Caleb hadn't caught her, holding her steady against him. "I've got you. Can you walk?" I don't." "All right. Hold on." He lifted her, actually lifted her, though she wasn't small, wasn't light, and carried her toward the cabin. She was too cold to be embarrassed, too exhausted to protest. She just buried her face against his shoulder and let him carry her through the storm. Inside, the warmth of the cabin hit like a wall. Caleb set her in a chair near the stove, then knelt in front of her, pulling off her frozen gloves. "Gotta check for frostbite," he said, examining her fingers with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. "Move your fingers for me." She tried. They moved sluggishly, painfully, but they moved. "Good. Feet now." He pulled off her boots, her socks, inspected her toes with the same careful attention. His hands were warm against her frozen skin, impossibly gentle. "You'll be all right," he said finally. "Hands and feet will hurt like hell once the feeling comes back. But no permanent damage." The cattle? "Safe. Because of you." He stood, moved to the stove, and started building up the fire. "If you hadn't come with me, I'd have lost half the herd. Maybe more." "I didn't do anything." "You did everything." He filled a pot with water, set it on the stove. "You went out in that storm when anyone with sense would have stayed inside. You stayed on your horse when most people would have fallen. You kept moving when your body was telling you to quit." Eliza's hands were starting to throb as warmth returned to them. The pain was excruciating. "I thought I was going to die." "So did I for a minute there." He poured hot water into a basin, brought it to her. "Put your hands in this, slow. It'll hurt worse before it gets better." It did hurt. She gasped as she lowered her hands into the warm water, pain shooting up her arms. But Caleb stayed beside her, his presence steady and calm, talking her through it. "That's it. Keep them in there. The pain means the blood's flowing again. That's good." Gradually, the pain subsided to a deep ache. Feeling returned to her fingers, her toes. She was alive. Improbably, impossibly alive. Caleb made coffee, strong and hot, and pressed a cup into her restored hands. She sipped it, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, for everything." He shook his head. "I should be thanking you. You saved my herd." "We saved it, together." Something shifted in his expression. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, cradling his own coffee cup. "I need to tell you something," he said. Before we go any further. Eliza's heart sank. Here it came. The reality check. The admission that this had all been a mistake. That she wasn't cut out for this life. When I wrote that advertisement, Caleb continued, I told myself I was looking for a practical partner. Someone who could work. Someone strong. He paused. But there was another reason. What reason? I was lonely. The admission seemed to cost him something. 5 years I've been alone on this ranch. 5 years of silence except for the wind and the cattle. I told myself it was better that way, safer, that I couldn't risk caring for someone again. But the truth is, I was just scared. Eliza set down her coffee cup. Scared of what? Of finding someone like Sarah again. Someone too delicate for this life. Someone I'd watch slowly break. He met her eyes. When you wrote back and told me about your size, about being a large woman, you know what I thought? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. I thought, here's someone who's had to be strong her whole life. Someone who knows what it's like to be judged and still keeps standing. Someone who might actually survive this place. He leaned forward. I didn't care what you looked like, Eliza. I cared whether you were strong enough to be my partner. What happened tonight? That was your test. And you passed it better than I had any right to hope. Tears burned behind Eliza's eyes, but these were different from the frozen ones on the ride back. These came from somewhere deeper. I was terrified, she whispered. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. He reached across the table, his scarred hand palm up between them. I know we barely know each other. I know this isn't a love match, but I think we could be real partners, if you're willing. Eliza looked at his offered hand, at the calluses and scars that told the story of hard work and harder years. She thought about the way he'd helped her onto the wagon without judgment, the way he'd carried her through the storm, the way he'd tended to her frozen hands with patient care. She placed her hand in his. I'm willing. Outside, the storm raged on, shaking the cabin walls, howling its fury at the night. But inside, two people who'd been strangers that morning sat together by the fire, hands clasped, beginning to build something neither of them had expected to find. A partnership. A home. Maybe, eventually, something even more. The wind screamed, but Eliza barely heard it. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 days before Christmas, in a cabin at the edge of the world, the future began to take shape. Eliza woke to the sound of wind still battering the cabin walls and the unfamiliar weight of quilts she didn't remember pulling over herself. Pale gray light filtered through the single-bedroom window, revealing a world transformed into solid white. Snow had drifted halfway up the glass, creating patterns like frozen lace against the pane. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her thighs screamed protest when she tried to move. Her shoulders felt like someone had beaten them with a hammer. Even her jaw hurt, probably from clenching it against the cold for hours. But she was alive. She sat up slowly, wincing, and noticed the bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through it, she could hear the crackle of the stove and the quiet sounds of someone moving carefully, trying not to wake her. Caleb must have carried her to bed after she'd fallen asleep in the chair by the fire. The thought made something warm unfurl in her chest. Not embarrassment, surprisingly, but gratitude. She dressed in the half-light, choosing her warmest dress and layering it with the thick wool stockings she'd brought from Boston. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons, still stiff and sore, but she managed. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Caleb at the stove, cooking something that smelled like salt pork and coffee. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his expression unreadable in the early morning light. You should have stayed in bed. You pushed yourself hard yesterday. So did you. I'm used to it. He gestured to the table where a plate was already set. Sit. Eat. Eliza lowered herself into the chair with as much dignity as her protesting muscles would allow. Caleb set a plate before her. Salt pork, fried potatoes, and something that might have been biscuits, though they looked nothing like the ones she'd made in Boston. I'm not much of a cook, he said, almost apologetically. Sarah used to, He stopped himself. Anyway, it'll keep you fed. She took a bite of the biscuit. It was dense, slightly burned on the bottom, and absolutely delicious in the way that food becomes when you're ravenous. It's perfect. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it beside her plate, then took his own seat across the table. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the scrape of forks against tin plates and the howl of wind outside. "Storm's still going," Eliza observed. "Been going all night. Probably won't let up until tomorrow at the earliest." Caleb looked toward the window, his jaw tight. "Which means we're trapped here, together, until it breaks." The implication hung in the air between them. Two strangers, alone in a cabin with nowhere to go and nothing to do but exist in each other's space. Eliza sipped her coffee, considering. "You have work that needs doing?" "Always, but nothing that can't wait a day or two." "Then teach me." He looked at her sharply. "Teach you what?" "Whatever you would normally be doing. I need to learn how this life works, don't I? Might as well start now." Something that might have been respect flickered across Caleb's weathered face. He set down his fork, thinking. "All right, we'll start with accounts. I need to record yesterday's losses and calculate what we saved." He stood and retrieved a worn ledger from a shelf, along with a stub of pencil. When he opened the book, Eliza saw columns of numbers written in a cramped utilitarian hand. Expenses, income, livestock counts, feed costs, the mathematics of survival. "Before the storm, I had 214 head of cattle," Caleb said, running his finger down the page. "We moved approximately 180 to Windbreak Canyon. That means there's about 34 still out there." "Will they survive?" His silence was answer enough. "So we lost 34 head." "Maybe. Some might find shelter on their own. Won't know until the storm breaks and we can search." He made a notation in the ledger. At current market prices, that's roughly $510 in potential losses. Eliza's breath caught. That was more than she'd earned in a year of sowing. "Can the ranch sustain that?" "It'll hurt, but we'll manage." He looked at her directly. "This is the reality, Eliza. Some years we profit, some years we just survive. Weather, disease, market prices, there's 100 things that can go wrong, and most of them will. Then why do it?" "Because it's mine." The fierceness in his voice surprised her. "Every inch of this land I worked for, cleared it, fenced it, built on it. Nobody handed me anything. And when I look out at those mountains, I don't see emptiness. I see possibility." Eliza understood that in her bones. It was the same reason she'd left Boston, the same hunger for something that was hers and hers alone. They spent the morning going over the accounts. Caleb explained his system, how he tracked breeding cycles, calculated feed costs per head, monitored market trends through the quarterly stockman's reports that came by mail. He showed her his notes on which bulls produced the strongest calves, which cows were getting too old to breed, which pastures recovered fastest after grazing. It was fascinating in a way Eliza hadn't expected. There was a logic to it, a pattern. It wasn't so different from managing fabric inventory and client orders at the sewing shop, just scaled up and infinitely more consequential. "You're good with numbers," Caleb observed, watching her add up a column of feed expenses. "I kept the books for the shop where I worked. The owner couldn't add 2 and 2 without counting on her fingers." "Then you'll handle the ranch accounts from now on." "I hate paperwork." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't quite an order either. It was the practical assignment of tasks between partners. Eliza nodded. "I can do that." By midday, the wind had intensified to a shriek that made conversation difficult. Snow drove against the windows with such force that Eliza feared the glass would shatter. The cabin creaked and groaned like a ship in a storm, and she found herself glancing at the ceiling, half expecting it to peel away. Caleb noticed. "Cabin stood for 8 years. It'll stand through this." "You built it yourself?" "Most of it. Had help with the roof and chimney." He added another log to the fire. Sarah picked the location. She wanted to be able to see the mountains from the window. It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife without pain tightening his features. "Progress, maybe." "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "Sarah. She always said the world was too hard on women who didn't fit the mold." "Was she?" "Small, delicate, everything a woman was supposed to be according to her family." Bitterness crept into his voice. They never forgave her for marrying a dirt-poor rancher and moving to Montana. Didn't even come for the funeral. Eliza's chest tightened with an old, familiar anger. People can be cruel about the choices we make for ourselves. Yes, he looked at her. They can. The afternoon wore on. The storm showed no signs of abating. Caleb taught her how to make proper biscuits, his large hands surprisingly deft as he showed her how to work the dough without overhandling it. She taught him a more efficient way to organize his supply inventory, grouping items by usage frequency rather than alphabetically. It was domestic, almost comfortable. Strange, considering they barely knew each other. As darkness fell early, winter darkness that came with the weight of absolute night, Caleb lit the oil lamps and settled into repairing a bridle that had cracked leather. Eliza pulled out her sewing kit and began mending one of his shirts that she'd noticed had a torn sleeve. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know, but it needs doing, and I'm good at it." He watched her work for a moment, her fingers quick and sure with needle and thread. "What made you choose sewing? As a trade, I mean." "Didn't have much choice. After my mother died, I needed work. The sewing shop was hiring, and I already knew how to use a needle." She nodded off a stitch. "Turned out I was good at it. Better than good. I could look at a woman and know exactly how fabric would drape on her body, what cut would flatter, what colors would make her eyes bright." "Sounds like you were wasted in someone else's shop." "I was, but women like me don't get to open their own shops. Banks don't lend money to unmarried women with no family connections. And even if they did—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Women who look like me aren't supposed to tell other women how to be beautiful. It's presumptuous." Caleb's hand stilled on the bridle. "That's the stupidest damn thing I've ever heard." The vehemence in his voice startled a laugh out of her. "Welcome to Boston society. Boston society can go to hell." "I'll drink to that." She raised her water glass in mock toast, and he matched the gesture with his coffee cup. They worked in companionable silence until Eliza's stomach growled audibly. Caleb stood and checked the pot of beans he'd set to soak that morning. "Should be ready soon. Not fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs." While he tended to dinner, Eliza moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass to peer out into the darkness. She couldn't see anything but her own reflection and the driving snow illuminated by lamplight from the cabin. The world had contracted to just this: 4 walls, warmth, and the quiet presence of a man she'd known for barely 24 hours, but who already felt less like a stranger than most people she'd known for years. "Penny for your thoughts," Caleb said behind her. "Just thinking how different this is from what I imagined." "Better or worse?" She considered. "Different. I expected, I don't know, awkwardness, discomfort, that sense of being tolerated rather than wanted. And instead, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, which is terrifying, honestly." Caleb came to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Why terrifying?" "Because what if it doesn't last? What if tomorrow you wake up and realize you've made a terrible mistake? What if I'm not strong enough, not capable enough?" "Stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "You rode out in a blizzard last night. You saved my herd. You're sitting here after a day that would have broken most people, already planning what needs doing tomorrow. If that's not strong enough, I don't know what is." Eliza turned to face him. In the lamplight, his features were softer, the hard edges worn smooth by shadow. "You don't know me, Caleb." "Not really." "What if there are parts of me you can't live with?" "Then we'll figure it out, together." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. "I'm not looking for perfection, Eliza. I'm looking for partnership. And so far, you've been a better partner than I had any right to expect." The touch of his hand burned through the fabric of her dress. Eliza's breath caught. This wasn't romance. Not yet, maybe not ever. But it was something. Connection, recognition, the beginning of trust. The moment broke when the wind slammed against the cabin with such force that the whole structure shuddered. Caleb's hand dropped, and he moved to check the door, making sure it was properly barred. "It's getting worse," he said. "We should eat and turn in early. Gonna be a long night." They ate beans and the last of the morning's biscuits. Then Caleb banked the fire for the night while Eliza washed the dishes in heated water. The routine felt established, as if they'd been doing this for years rather than days. "You take the bedroom," Caleb said. "I'll bed down out here like always." Eliza looked at the thin bedroll he'd laid out near the stove. "That can't be comfortable." "Comfortable enough." "Caleb, we're going to be married in 2 days. Surely we can—" "No!" The word came out harder than he'd probably intended. He softened his tone. "Not like this. Not because we're trapped in a storm with nowhere else to go. If we... He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I want it to be a choice, not a necessity." Eliza's throat tightened with something she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe. Or something deeper. "All right, thank you." She retreated to the bedroom, closing the door most of the way. Through the gap, she could see Caleb settling onto his bedroll, see the lamplight playing across the cabin's rough walls. She changed into her nightgown, braided her hair, and slipped under the quilts. Sleep should have come easily. She was exhausted down to her bones. But instead she lay awake listening to the storm rage and thinking about the man sleeping on the other side of that door. A man who'd carried her through a blizzard, who'd tended her frozen hands, who'd spent the day teaching her his trade as if her learning mattered, who'd just turned down an opportunity that most men would have seized out of respect for her dignity. She'd expected many things from this arrangement. She hadn't expected to start falling for him. The thought terrified her. Sometime deep in the night, Eliza woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind. She'd grown almost accustomed to that constant howl. This was different. A creak, a groan, and then a crash that brought her bolt upright in bed, heart hammering. "Caleb!" The bedroom door flew open. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, lamp in hand, already dressed. "Are you hurt?" "No, what was that sound?" "Barn. Part of the roof gave way, I think." He was already moving, grabbing his heavy coat. "I need to check the horses." "I'm coming with you." "Eliza, it's the middle of the night. The storm's still... If the roof collapsed, you'll need help. Don't waste time arguing." For a second, she thought he'd refuse. Then he nodded curtly and tossed her the coat she'd worn yesterday. They bundled up in silence, wrapping scarves around their faces, pulling on every layer they could find. The moment they opened the door, the wind tried to rip it from its hinges. Caleb threw his weight against it, forcing it shut behind them. The cold was instantly brutal, worse somehow than yesterday. The darkness was absolute except for the feeble circle of light from the lamp Caleb carried. They fought their way toward the barn, Caleb in front, Eliza clinging to his coat to avoid being separated. The snow was already knee-deep in places, drifts piled against every surface. 20 feet from the cabin, Eliza couldn't see it anymore. The world had become nothing but wind and snow and darkness. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, chaos. Part of the roof had indeed collapsed under the weight of snow, and 3 of the horses were loose, panic wild, crashing into stalls and each other. The 4th, the gray mare, steady, was trapped under a fallen beam, thrashing and screaming. "Oh no," Eliza breathed. Caleb was already moving, handing her the lamp. "Hold this. Keep it steady." He approached the trapped horse carefully, voice low and soothing despite the pandemonium around them. "Easy, girl, easy. I know it hurts. I'm going to help you." The beam pinning steady was massive, part of the main roof support. There was no way one person could lift it. "Eliza, I need you to get the other horses secured first. Can you do that?" She looked at the 3 loose horses, all of them spooked and dangerous in their fear. She'd barely ridden 3 times before yesterday. She had no idea how to handle panicked animals. "Yes," she said. She set the lamp in a protected corner and moved toward the nearest horse, the big bay gelding Caleb had ridden yesterday. It was rearing and kicking, eyes rolling white with terror. "Easy," she said, pitching her voice low the way Caleb had. "Easy, boy. You're all right. Everything's going to be all right." She had no idea if that was true, but she kept talking, kept her hands visible, kept her movements slow and deliberate. The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. She edged closer, grabbed the dangling halter, held firm when he tried to pull away. "That's it. Good boy. Let's get you somewhere safe." She led him to an intact stall, secured the gate, then went for the second horse. And the third. By the time she'd gotten them all settled, her hands were shaking and her heart was trying to escape through her ribs, but she'd done it. Caleb was kneeling beside Steady, examining the trapped leg. "It's bad," he said quietly. "Might be broken. Can we get her free?" "We can try." He positioned himself at one end of the beam. "I'm going to lift. When I do, you pull her out. Don't hesitate. I won't be able to hold it long." Eliza moved to the horse's head, grabbed the halter with both hands. "Ready. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Caleb lifted with a grunt of effort that was almost a roar. The beam rose a few precious inches. Eliza pulled with everything she had, and Steady scrambled forward, dragging her injured leg. As soon as the horse was clear, Caleb dropped the beam with a crash. For a moment they just stood there, breathing hard, while Steady lay on her side, ribs heaving. Will she be all right?" Eliza asked. Caleb knelt beside the mare, running his hands carefully along the injured leg. The horse flinched but didn't try to kick. "Not broken, I think, but badly sprained. She won't be rideable for weeks." "But she'll live?" "If we can keep her calm and warm, yes." They worked together to make Steady as comfortable as possible, piling straw bedding around her, covering her with horse blankets. The other horses had settled somewhat, though they remained nervous, stamping and snorting in their stalls. Caleb surveyed the damaged roof. "This won't hold if we get more snow. I need to shore it up." "Now? In the dark?" "Can't wait until morning. The whole thing could come down." So they worked through what remained of the night. Caleb found spare lumber and tools, and together they braced the sagging section of roof as best they could. It was brutal work, hammering nails with frozen fingers, holding boards steady while wind tore at them, climbing into the rafters where the cold was even worse. Eliza had never done anything like this. Her hands blistered. She smashed her thumb twice with the hammer. Splinters drove deep into her palms. But she didn't stop, didn't complain, just kept handing Caleb nails and boards and doing whatever he told her to do. By the time they finished, gray dawn was breaking, and Eliza couldn't feel her hands at all. They stumbled back to the cabin together, too exhausted to speak. Inside, Caleb immediately went to check Eliza's hands. "This one's bad," he said, examining her thumb, which had swollen to twice its normal size and was turning an impressive shade of purple. "And you've got splinters all through here." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Sit." He heated water, soaked clean cloth, and began the painstaking process of removing splinters with a needle he sterilized in the lamp flame. Eliza gritted her teeth against the pain, watching his bent head as he worked with infinite care. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked up, startled. "For what?" "For being clumsy, for not knowing what I was doing, for—" "You saved those horses," Caleb interrupted. "All 3 of them. Do you understand that? They would have injured themselves or each other if you hadn't gotten them secured. You would have done it faster. I would have had to let Steady stay trapped while I dealt with them. By the time I got back to her, she might have done permanent damage trying to free herself." He returned to removing splinters. "You did exactly what needed doing, Eliza, and you didn't quit, even when you were clearly in pain. I didn't want to disappoint you." His hands stilled. "You couldn't." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza's chest tightened. This man, this stranger who was becoming less strange by the hour, was looking at her like she mattered, like she was valuable, like she was enough. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you believe in me when I barely believe in myself?" Caleb set aside the needle and took both her damaged hands in his, careful of her injuries. "Because I see you, Eliza. Not what Boston told you to be. Not some idea of what a woman should look like or act like. I see you, the woman who rode into a blizzard to save cattle, who spent all night in a freezing barn helping injured horses, who hasn't complained once about discomfort or fear or pain. I've been terrified since I got here. And you keep going anyway. That's courage." Tears burned behind Eliza's eyes. "I don't feel courageous. The bravest people never do." He squeezed her hands gently, then released them and stood. "Get some sleep. We both need it." But sleep wouldn't come. Not even after Caleb had gone to his bedroll and the cabin had fallen quiet. Eliza lay in the darkness, her hands throbbing, her body aching, her mind replaying the last 48 hours in vivid detail. She'd come here expecting to endure, to survive, to trade the judgment of Boston for the isolation of Montana and call it an improvement. But this was something else entirely. This was partnership in its truest form. This was two people facing impossible odds and refusing to break. This was the beginning of something she'd never dared to dream about. Trust. Maybe even love. The storm finally broke on Christmas Eve morning, leaving behind a world transformed into something beautiful and deadly. Snow lay thick as a man's thigh across the valley, sculpted into drifts that gleamed like bone under brilliant sunlight. The sky burned impossibly blue, cold, and clean, the kind of blue that only came after violent weather had scoured every trace of impurity from the air. Eliza stood at the cabin window, her bandaged hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching Caleb make his way through the snow toward the barn. He moved with purpose despite the obvious exhaustion etched into every line of his body. Neither of them had slept more than a few hours since the roof collapse. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, hair tangled from restless sleep, dark circles under her eyes, bruises blooming purple on her forearms from the work in the barn. She looked like someone who'd been through a war. She felt like someone who'd survived one. The door opened, bringing a rush of cold air, and Caleb stomping snow from his boots. "Steady standing," he said without preamble. "Putting weight on the leg, that's good." And the others? Restless but unharmed. He shrugged off his coat, moved to the stove to warm his hands. "We got lucky. Could have been much worse." "How much worse?" "Could have lost all 4 horses. Could have lost the whole barn." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Could have lost you if you'd been standing in the wrong place when that beam came down." Eliza set down her coffee cup carefully. "But we didn't. Lose anything, I mean." "No, we didn't." Silence settled between them, thick with things unsaid. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat. "We were supposed to go into town today. For the wedding." Eliza's stomach tightened. She'd almost forgotten. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow was meant to be their wedding day at the church in Alder Creek, with the circuit preacher who only came through once a month, witnessed by whatever townspeople happened to be there. "The road will be impassable," she said, "for at least a week, maybe 2. He studied her face. "Does that bother you?" Did it? Eliza turned the question over in her mind, examining it from all angles. A week ago, the idea of delaying a wedding would have sent her into a panic. What if he changed his mind? What if the delay gave him time to reconsider? What if this was just an excuse to back out gracefully? But that was before the blizzard, before the barn, before she'd seen who Caleb Mercer really was when the world tried to break him. "No," she said, and meant it. "It doesn't bother me." "We could do it anyway," Caleb said quietly. "Here. Just us. It wouldn't be legal until we can get to town to file the papers, but we could speak the vows. Make the promises. If you wanted to." Eliza's breath caught. "Why would we do that?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his winter sky eyes. "Because I've spent 2 days watching you be braver than anyone I've ever known. Because you're already my partner in every way that matters. Because waiting for a preacher and witnesses seems like waiting for permission we don't need. And if I say no, then we wait. No pressure, Eliza. This has to be your choice as much as mine." She thought about Boston, about the whispered conversations behind fans and gloved hands, about the assumption that she should be grateful for any man's attention, that she had no right to standards or expectations of her own, about how she'd learned to make herself smaller, not physically, that was impossible, but smaller in spirit, in voice, in the space she allowed herself to occupy. Standing here in this rough cabin at the edge of the wilderness, her hands bandaged and her body aching, she'd never felt larger, never felt more fully herself. "Yes," she said, "let's do it. Today." Something fierce and bright blazed in Caleb's eyes. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He nodded once, decisive. "Then we'll need to make this proper. Give me an hour." He disappeared into the bedroom, and Eliza heard the sounds of drawers opening, objects being moved. She used the time to heat water and wash as best she could, to brush out her hair and re-braid it carefully. She changed into the best dress she'd brought, deep green wool that she'd sewn herself, the stitching perfect even if the fabric had to be let out more than standard patterns allowed. When she emerged, Caleb had transformed the cabin's main room. He'd cleared the table and covered it with a clean white cloth. On it sat 2 tin cups and a bottle of whiskey that looked older than the cabin itself. He'd swept the floor and added logs to the fire until it roared, filling the room with warmth and dancing light. And he'd changed into clothes Eliza hadn't seen before. Dark trousers, a white shirt that was actually pressed, a vest that had seen better days but was clean and carefully mended. His hair was slicked back with water, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked, Eliza thought with a jolt of surprise, handsome. Not in the soft, refined way of Boston gentlemen, but in a way that spoke of strength and character worn into the very bones. "You look beautiful," Caleb said, his voice rough. No one had ever called her beautiful before. Pretty, perhaps, in that dismissive way people used when they meant pretty for a large girl. Handsome, occasionally, with all the unflattering implications that word carried, but never beautiful, said like he meant it, like it was simply a fact of the world. "Thank you," she managed. They stood facing each other in the center of the cabin, the fire crackling behind them, winter sunlight streaming through the windows. Caleb held out his hand and Eliza took it, his calloused palm rough against her bandaged fingers. "I don't know the proper words," he said. "Never been good with words, but I can tell you what I promise." "That's all I need." He took a breath. "I promise to treat you as my equal partner in all things, to listen to your counsel and respect your judgment, to share the profits and losses of this ranch equally with you, to keep you safe to the best of my ability, and to ask nothing of you that I wouldn't do myself." His grip tightened slightly. "I promise not to judge you by standards you had no part in making, not to expect you to be anything other than who you are, not to love you less on days when you're tired or frightened or hurting, because I'll have those days too, and I'll need you to be patient with me." Eliza's vision blurred with tears. These weren't the flowery vows she'd heard at Boston weddings, full of poetry and romance and promises that meant nothing when tested. These were the vows of a man who'd learned that survival required honesty. "Your turn," Caleb said softly. Eliza gathered her thoughts, trying to put into words what she felt. "I promise to be the partner you need, not the decoration society says you should want. To work as hard as you work, to carry my share of the burden without complaint. To learn what I don't know, and to teach what I do." She squeezed his hand. "I promise to see you clearly, not as a savior or a convenience, but as a man with his own scars and struggles. To be patient when you're difficult and honest when you're wrong. To build something with you that's ours alone, that doesn't apologize for being different from what other people think it should be. And I promise," she continued, her voice strengthening, "to stop believing the lies I was told about my own worth. To stand beside you as an equal, not grateful for scraps of affection, but expecting respect and giving it in return." Caleb's eyes shone with something that might have been tears. "Then, by the authority of... hell, I don't know. By the authority of 2 people making a choice, in front of this fire and this land, and whatever force holds the world together, I say we're married." He pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't tentative or careful. It was hungry and certain, the kiss of a man who decided to stop holding back. Eliza melted into it, her arms going around his neck, her body pressing against his. He was solid and warm and real, and for the first time in her life she felt desired not despite who she was, but because of it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Well," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's done then." "That's done," Eliza agreed. He poured whiskey into both tin cups, handed her one. "To partnership." "To partnership." They drank, the whiskey burning down her throat, warming her from the inside. Caleb set aside his cup and pulled her close again, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For saying yes to a stranger's advertisement, for getting on that train, for not turning around and running when you saw how hard this life is." "Thank you for seeing me," Eliza replied. "Really seeing me. Do you know how rare that is?" He held her tighter. "I do." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, until the practical realities of ranch life reasserted themselves. There were still animals to feed, repairs to finish, a future to build. But first, Caleb insisted, they would rest. They ate a simple meal of the beans and biscuits that had become their staples, then sat together by the fire, Eliza's head on Caleb's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Tell me about Sarah," Eliza said. "If you want to." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was kind, gentle. She loved poetry and music and beautiful things. The ranch was my dream, not hers, but she came anyway because she loved me." That sounds like real love. It was, but love alone isn't enough out here. She needed softness, needed beauty and culture and conversation. I couldn't give her any of that, and every day I watched her fade a little more. By the time the fever came, part of me thinks she was almost ready to go. Eliza heard the guilt in his voice, the question he'd been carrying for 5 years. "You couldn't have saved her, Caleb, not from who she was." I know that in my head. My heart's still working on believing it. "She wouldn't want you to stop living because she couldn't." "No," he agreed. "She wouldn't. Sarah was better than that." He pulled Eliza closer. "I think she'd like knowing I found someone who's built for this life. Someone who chooses it, not just endures it." They fell silent again, watching the fire burn low. Eventually, Caleb stirred. "I should check on the horses one more time before dark." "I'll come with you." "Eliza, you need to rest." "So do you, and I'm not letting you go out there alone." He smiled, that small, rare smile that made her heart skip. "Stubborn woman. You have no idea." They bundled up against the cold and made their way to the barn through snow that came up to Eliza's knees. Inside, the horses had settled, their earlier panic forgotten. Steady lifted her head when they entered, nickering softly. Caleb ran expert hands over the mare's injured leg, nodding with satisfaction. "Swelling's down. She'll heal." "How long before she can be ridden?" 6 weeks, maybe 8. He straightened, brushing straw from his hands. "Which means we're down to 3 working horses until spring, going to make things harder." "We'll manage," Eliza said, echoing his words from days before. "Yes?" He looked at her across the dim barn, his expression unreadable. "We will." That night, for the first time, Eliza didn't sleep alone in the bedroom. They lay together in the narrow bed, fully clothed, her head on his chest, his arms around her. It was warm and safe and intimate in a way that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with trust. "Are you afraid?" Caleb asked into the darkness. "Of what?" "Of this. Us. What we've committed to." Eliza considered. "I'm afraid of failing, of not being strong enough when the next crisis comes, of disappointing you." "You won't. You can't know that." "I can." His arms tightened around her. "Because I've seen what you do when you're afraid. You keep going. That's all strength is, Eliza. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it stop you." She turned her face into his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, wood smoke and leather and clean sweat. "What are you afraid of?" He was quiet for a long time. "Losing you. Not to death, necessarily, but to the slow realization that this life isn't what you wanted. That Montana winters and isolation and endless work weren't what you signed up for." "I knew what I was signing up for." "Did you? Really? Or did you just know you wanted to escape Boston?" It was a fair question. Eliza thought back to the woman who'd stepped off the train just days ago. Was it really only 3 days? It felt like a lifetime. That woman had been running from something. This woman, lying in the arms of her husband, had found something to run toward. "I came here for escape," she admitted. "I'm staying for something else." "What?" "For the chance to build something that's mine. Ours. For partnership with someone who sees me as equal. For the possibility that maybe, eventually, this could become love." Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers interlacing. "Eventually?" Eliza's breath caught at the question in his voice. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I married you today, not just for practical reasons. I'm saying that watching you face down that blizzard, seeing you fight for those horses, learning who you are under pressure. I'm saying I'm already halfway to loving you, Eliza Hart Mercer. And I suspect the other half won't take long. Tears slipped down her cheeks, warm against her cold skin. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be loved, accept it, believe I deserve it. Then we'll learn together, Caleb said simply, just like everything else. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together against the cold and the darkness and the unknown future. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the world glittering under fresh snow. Eliza woke to find Caleb already up, standing at the window, his silhouette dark against the brilliant light. It's beautiful, she said softly. He turned, and the expression on his face was complicated, joy mixed with something that looked like grief. Sarah died on Christmas Day, 5 years ago today. Eliza's heart clenched. Oh, Caleb. I thought I'd hate this day forever, he continued. Thought I'd spend every Christmas for the rest of my life remembering what I lost. But standing here this morning with you in my bed and the ranch still standing and a future that doesn't feel like just survival, I'm grateful. For Sarah, for what we had, for the fact that she brought me here, and for you, for choosing this life, for choosing me. Eliza went to him, sliding her arms around his waist, holding him as tightly as she could. We can honor her today. Remember her. That doesn't diminish what we have. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They spent Christmas Day working side by side, as they'd spent every day since Eliza's arrival. They fed the horses, cleared snow from around the barn, checked and rechecked the repairs Caleb had made to the roof. They inventoried supplies and made plans for what they'd need when the road to town finally cleared. In the afternoon, Eliza insisted on making a proper Christmas dinner from their limited supplies. Roasted salt pork, potatoes fried in lard, biscuits that actually rose properly this time. It wasn't fancy by Boston standards, but it was honest work, honestly made. As the sun set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, they sat together at the table, sharing the meal in a comfortable silence. I have something for you, Caleb said suddenly. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. I made this for Sarah, but she died before I could give it to her. I want you to have it. Eliza opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a necklace, a simple silver chain with a pendant carved from some dark, beautiful wood. The pendant was shaped like a mountain peak, every detail precise and lovely. Caleb, it's beautiful, but Sarah would want you to have it, he said firmly. She believed in second chances, in not letting grief stop you from living. This necklace was meant to celebrate a new life in Montana. It still is. With trembling fingers, Eliza lifted the necklace from the box. Caleb took it from her and fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. There, he said softly. Now you have something of this place to carry with you. A reminder that you belong here. Eliza touched the pendant, feeling the smooth wood warm against her throat. Thank you. That night, they made love for the first time, slow and careful, learning each other's bodies with the same patience they'd learned each other's working rhythms. Eliza had been prepared for awkwardness, for discomfort, for the vulnerability of being seen completely. Instead, she found reverence. Caleb touched her like she was precious, traced the curves of her body with wonder rather than judgment. And when he held her afterward, her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear, she felt something shift inside her, the final crumbling of the walls she'd built to protect herself from a world that had never valued her. I love you, she said into the darkness, the words escaping before she could stop them. Caleb's arms tightened around her. I love you too. It was that simple, that complicated, that utterly, perfectly right. Over the next few days, they fell into rhythms that felt ancient despite being newly formed. They woke together, worked together, ate together, slept together. Caleb taught Eliza how to read the sky for weather, how to check cattle for signs of illness, how to conserve heat and supplies when winter pressed hard against the walls. Eliza taught Caleb how to organize the chaos of ranch paperwork into something manageable, how to plan meals that stretched their supplies further, how to mend not just clothing, but the small tears in the fabric of daily life. They learned each other's silences, when quiet meant contentment and when it meant worry. They learned how to work side by side for hours without speaking, communication reduced to glances and gestures, and an understanding that went deeper than words. And slowly, carefully, they began to let themselves believe that this might actually work, that two damaged people might build something whole together. On the 8th day after the storm, Caleb announced they needed to check on the herd in Windbreak Canyon. "Can we get there?" Eliza asked, eyeing the still deep snow. "We'll have to try. They've been on their own too long. Need to make sure they have enough forage, that none of them are injured or sick." "Then I'm coming with you." "Eliza, don't even try to argue. I'm your partner, remember? Where you go, I go." He smiled, shaking his head. "Stubborn woman." "You married me anyway." "I did indeed." The ride to Windbreak Canyon was brutal but manageable, the horses finding paths through the snow with the sure-footedness of animals who knew this land better than any human ever could. Eliza rode better than she had that first desperate night, still not graceful but competent, her body learning the rhythm of the horse's movement. When they reached the canyon, relief flooded through her. The cattle were there, thin but alive, huddled together for warmth. Caleb counted them carefully, comparing the numbers to what he remembered. "We only lost 12, he said, wonder in his voice. "I thought it would be twice that." "Is that good?" "That's remarkable. In a storm like that, losing half the herd would have been understandable. Losing 12 is—" He trailed off, looking at Eliza with something like awe. "You saved them. If we hadn't moved them when we did, they'd all be dead." "We saved them," she corrected. "Together." He rode close to her, leaned over, and kissed her hard. "Together," he agreed. They spent hours checking each animal, looking for injuries or signs of illness. Caleb was patient, showing Eliza what to look for, explaining the subtle signs that meant an animal was struggling. By the time they finished, the sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting everything gold. "We should head back," Caleb said. "Don't want to be caught out after dark." But as they turned their horses toward home, a sound stopped them. A low, pained lowing from deeper in the canyon. Caleb's expression sharpened. "There's another one, separated from the herd." They found the cow collapsed in a snowdrift, her sides heaving, clearly in distress. Caleb dismounted quickly, approached carefully. "She's calving," he said. "Too early and in the wrong conditions. This is bad." "What do we do?" "Try to help her. If we can." He looked up at Eliza. "This might not end well. Are you prepared for that?" Eliza thought about Boston, about the sanitized version of life she'd known there, where unpleasant realities were hidden behind closed doors and polite silence. This was different. This was raw and real and honest. "Tell me what to do," she said. They worked together in the fading light, Caleb's experienced hands guiding the calf into position, Eliza holding the cow's head, speaking softly to her, offering what comfort she could. It was messy and difficult and heartbreaking, the cow's pain palpable in every labored breath. But finally, miraculously, the calf slipped free. It lay motionless in the snow for a terrible moment, and Eliza's heart sank. Then Caleb rubbed it vigorously with handfuls of snow, and suddenly the calf gasped, coughed, and began to breathe. "It's alive," Eliza whispered. "She's alive," Caleb corrected, a grin splitting his weathered face. "We've got ourselves a Christmas calf." The mother cow, exhausted but relieved, began cleaning her baby with long swipes of her tongue. Caleb and Eliza stood watching, covered in blood and fluid and snow, as the calf took its first wobbling steps. "She won't last the night out here," Caleb said. "They both need shelter and warmth." "Can we get them back to the ranch?" "We'll have to try." It was fully dark by the time they started the journey home, Caleb riding ahead with the newborn calf draped across his saddle, Eliza following behind, coaxing the exhausted mother cow forward. The cold was intense, the darkness absolute except for the pale light of stars and snow. Eliza had never been so tired. Every muscle ached, her hands were numb despite her gloves. But she kept going, kept encouraging the cow, kept putting one step in front of the other. When they finally saw the warm glow of cabin windows in the distance, she wanted to weep with relief. They got both cow and calf settled in the barn, bedded down in thick straw with horse blankets for extra warmth. The calf nursed eagerly while they watched, and the mother's dark eyes regarded them with what Eliza chose to believe was gratitude. "That's life on a ranch," Caleb said as they finally trudged back to the cabin. "Loss and survival, sometimes in the same day." "I understand now," Eliza said. "Why you do this. It's not just about the money or the land. It's about this. Being part of something bigger than yourself. Helping life continue in the face of everything trying to stop it." Caleb stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "You really do understand." "I'm starting to." He pulled her into his arms, held her tight despite their exhaustion and the cold and the mess they were both covered in. "I knew I made the right choice the moment you stepped off that train, but every day since, you've proven it beyond any doubt." Eliza buried her face in his shoulder. "I was so afraid I wouldn't be enough." "You're more than enough. You're everything." They stood there in the snow under the vast Montana sky, two people who'd taken the biggest gamble of their lives and won something neither had expected to find. Not just survival, not just partnership, but home. The first signs of spring came not with warmth, but with sound. The drip of melting snow from the cabin roof, the crack of ice breaking on the creek, the return of birds whose calls Eliza had never heard before. She stood at the cabin door one late February morning, coffee in hand, watching water run in rivulets down the hillside, and felt something shift inside her chest. Hope. "First melt," Caleb said behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. "Means we've got about 6 weeks before the real thaw, and then calving season begins in earnest." Eliza leaned back against him, marveling at how natural this had become. His touch, his presence, the easy intimacy that had grown between them like something organic and inevitable. "How many calves are we expecting?" "If we're lucky, about 70. If we're not, fewer." He kissed the top of her head. "Either way, it'll be the hardest work you've done yet." "Harder than the blizzard?" "Different hard. That was survival. This is sustaining what we built, making it grow." She turned in his arms to face him. "Then we'd better start preparing." Over the following weeks, they worked with renewed purpose. The road to town had finally cleared enough for travel, and they made the long trek to Alder Creek to file their marriage papers and stock up on supplies. The circuit preacher blessed their union officially, though it felt almost like an afterthought. They'd been married in every way that mattered since Christmas Day. In town, Eliza felt the weight of curious stares. The other women studied her with barely concealed assessment, their gazes traveling from her face to her figure with the practiced calculation of people making judgments. She heard the whispers, caught fragments of conversation. "That's Mercer's new wife? She's quite substantial. Poor man. Must have been desperate. I give it 6 months before she runs back east." Eliza's spine stiffened, old familiar shame rising like bile in her throat. But then Caleb's hand found hers, his grip firm and certain, and he led her through the general store with his head high, introducing her to everyone they met not as my wife, but as my partner. At the dry goods counter, the merchant's wife, a thin, pinched woman named Mrs. Henshaw, looked Eliza up and down with poorly disguised disapproval. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "how brave of you to take on ranch life. I'm sure it must be quite an adjustment from city living." "It's exactly what I wanted," Eliza replied evenly. "Really? Even in your condition?" The word hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Eliza felt Caleb tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand gently. This was her battle to fight. "If you're referring to my size, Mrs. Henshaw, I assure you it hasn't hindered my work. In fact, I suspect I'm stronger than most women you know. I'd have to be to survive a Montana winter on a working ranch." Mrs. Henshaw's lips pursed. "I simply meant—" "I know exactly what you meant." Eliza's voice remained calm but carried steel underneath. "And I'm telling you that my husband values strength and capability over conventional beauty. It's a perspective more people might benefit from adopting." Caleb made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Mrs. Henshaw turned an impressive shade of red, and several nearby customers suddenly became very interested in examining flour sacks and tinned goods. As they left the store, supplies loaded in the wagon, Caleb pulled Eliza into a quick, fierce kiss right there on the street. "What was that for?" she asked, breathless. for standing up to that poisonous woman, for not letting her make you feel small, for being magnificent. Eliza's cheeks warmed. I couldn't let her talk about us like that, about you like you'd made some tragic mistake. The only mistake would have been letting you get back on that train. He helped her up onto the wagon seat. Let them talk. They'll understand soon enough what kind of woman I married. But the encounter left Eliza unsettled. On the long ride home, she found herself wrestling with old demons she'd thought she'd buried. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Choosing me instead of someone else? Caleb was silent for a long moment, his hand steady on the reins. You want honesty? Her heart clenched. Always. When you first stepped off that train for about 10 seconds, I panicked. Not because of how you looked, because I realized how much I'd already invested in the idea of you. What if we couldn't stand each other? What if the person in the letters was nothing like the person standing in front of me? And then you looked me straight in the eye, chin up, daring me to find you wanting. And I thought, here's someone who's been underestimated her whole life and refuses to accept it. Here's someone with the kind of strength that can't be broken because it's already been tested. That's what I saw, Eliza. Not your size, your steel. She blinked back tears. Even now? After living with me for 2 months? After seeing all my flaws? Especially now. You're stubborn as hell. You can't cook worth a damn. And you're terrible at waking up in the morning. But you're also brilliant with numbers. You've got hands that can mend anything, and you face every challenge like it's a personal insult you intend to defeat. I wouldn't trade you for 10 conventional beauties. Eliza laughed through her tears. I am getting better at cooking. You're getting marginally less likely to burn things. There's a difference. They arrived home as the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. As Caleb unloaded supplies, Eliza stood looking at the cabin, the barn, the land stretching endlessly in all directions. This was hers now, theirs, a place where she didn't have to apologize for existing. That night, sitting at the table while Caleb worked on harness repairs, Eliza pulled out paper and pen. What are you writing? He asked. A letter to the boarding house in Boston, telling them where to send the last of my things. Closing that door? Firmly. She paused, pen hovering over paper. And I'm writing to 3 women I knew there. Women like me, unmarried, working, considered undesirable. I'm going to tell them there's another way. That there are places in this country where strength matters more than appearance. Caleb set down the harness. You want to help other women come west? Not just come west. Find partnerships like we have. Real partnerships, built on respect and shared work rather than conforming to someone else's idea of what's acceptable. She looked at him. Would that bother you? Why would it bother me? Some men wouldn't want their wives encouraging other women to have expectations, to demand equality. He crossed to her, knelt beside her chair, and took her hands in his. Eliza, any man worth marrying should want a partner, not a servant. If those women find what we've found, their husbands will be lucky men. Write your letters. Send as many as you want. Spring arrived in earnest in late March, bringing with it a transformation of the valley. Snow retreated to the highest peaks, revealing land that had been buried for months. Grass pushed through the thawing earth. Wildflowers Eliza had never seen exploded in riots of color across the hillsides. The world felt reborn. And with spring came calving season. Eliza quickly learned that bringing new life into the world was messy, unpredictable, and occasionally heartbreaking. They lost 2 calves in the first week, one born too weak to survive, another rejected by its mother. Each loss hit Eliza like a physical blow, but Caleb taught her how to mourn quickly and move on. There was always another cow about to give birth, always another crisis demanding attention. She learned to read the signs of imminent labor, learned how to assist when a calf was positioned wrong, learned the terrible calculus of when to intervene and when to let nature take its course. Her hands, already calloused from winter work, developed new layers of toughness. Her back ached constantly. She slept in snatches between checking on laboring cows. But she also learned the fierce joy of watching a newborn calf take its first wobbling steps, the satisfaction of saving a life that would have been lost without her intervention, the pride of looking across a field dotted with calves and knowing she'd helped bring each one safely into the world. One night, 3 weeks into calving season, Eliza returned to the cabin at dawn after spending the entire night in the barn with a difficult birth. She was covered in blood and fluid, exhausted beyond words, her entire body trembling with fatigue. Caleb took one look at her and steered her to a chair. "You need to rest." "The spotted cow is still—" "I'll handle the spotted cow. You need sleep." "Caleb, I can't just—" "Yes, you can." His voice was gentle but firm. "You've been running on nothing but determination for days. I need you healthy, Eliza. The ranch needs you healthy. That means rest." She wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her, swaying dangerously. Caleb caught her, lifted her easily despite her protests, and carried her to the bedroom. "Sleep," he commanded. "I'll wake you if anything critical happens." She wanted to resist, to insist she could keep going, but the moment her head hit the pillow, darkness claimed her. She woke 12 hours later to find the sun low in the western sky and Caleb sitting beside the bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What happened?" she asked groggily. "The spotted cow had twin calves, both healthy. I managed without you, though barely." He brushed hair back from her forehead. "You were right, about everything being harder in spring. I didn't realize how much harder until I had to do it alone for half a day." Eliza sat up, wincing as every muscle protested. "I should have been there. You were exhausted. You needed rest." He handed her a cup of water. "I'm supposed to be your partner, remember? That means sometimes I carry more weight so you can recover. Just like you carried extra weight during the storm so I could focus on the herd. Is this what partnership looks like? Taking turns falling apart?" "Pretty much." He smiled, that rare, bright smile that made her heart skip. "Welcome to marriage." As spring progressed, they fell into new rhythms dictated by the demands of a growing herd. The work was relentless. Fences needed repairing after winter damage, pastures needed rotating to prevent overgrazing, calves needed branding and ear tagging. Eliza learned to ride well enough to help move cattle between pastures. She learned to throw a rope with reasonable accuracy. She learned which bulls were temperamental and which could be trusted. And in the evenings, when they were both too exhausted to do more than collapse by the fire, she pulled out her sewing kit and began creating things they needed. New curtains for the cabin, proper fitted shirts for Caleb, cushions for the hard wooden chairs. Her hands remembered the skills that had sustained her in Boston, but now she was creating for her own home, not for strangers' weddings. Word of her skills spread among the neighboring ranches. By May, she had 3 commissions: a wedding dress for a rancher's daughter, winter coats for a family who'd lost everything in a house fire, and christening gowns for twins born to the family that ran the general store in town. "You're building a business," Caleb observed one evening, watching her pin pattern pieces to fabric she'd ordered from a catalog. "Just helping out neighbors." "No, you're building a business, and you should charge for it." Eliza looked up, surprised. "They're already paying me." "They're paying you what they'd pay any seamstress. You should charge what you're worth, which is more. Your work is better than anything they could get in town, and custom work deserves custom prices." "People will think I'm greedy, especially given how I look. They already think what you let them think." Caleb came and knelt beside her chair. "You're skilled, Eliza, talented. You deserve to be compensated fairly for that talent. Don't undersell yourself because you're afraid of judgment." She met his eyes, seeing absolute certainty there. "What if they say no?" "Then they say no. But at least you'll have asked for what you're worth." She took his advice. When Mrs. Henshaw came to pick up the christening gowns and saw the exquisite detailing, hand-sewn lace, perfectly placed tucks, embroidery so fine it looked like painting, her expression shifted from condescension to something approaching respect. "These are extraordinary," she admitted grudgingly. "Thank you. That will be $15. Mrs. Henshaw's eyes widened. "15? I thought we agreed on 8. "We agreed on 8 for simple gowns. These aren't simple. Look at the lacework alone. That's 40 hours of hand stitching. $15 is quite reasonable for custom work of this quality." For a moment, Eliza thought Mrs. Henshaw would refuse. Then the older woman pulled out her purse and counted out $15 in coins. "You're quite the businesswoman, Mrs. Mercer." "I'm learning." As Mrs. Henshaw left, Eliza stared at the money in her hand, nearly twice what she'd expected. Caleb had been right. Her work had value, and she deserved to claim it. That night, she showed him the money. "You were right." "Usually am," he said with false modesty that made her laugh. "I'm serious. I've been undervaluing myself for so long that I forgot what it felt like to demand fair compensation. And now? Now I know what I'm worth, at least in terms of sewing." She set the money on the table. "This goes into the ranch fund, for whatever we need." Caleb pushed the money back toward her. "This is yours. You earned it. We're partners. What's mine is yours, and what's mine is yours. But you earned this with your own skill, separate from ranch work. It should be yours to spend as you choose." They compromised, putting half in the ranch fund and half in a small box Eliza kept for her personal earnings. Within 3 months, that box held more money than she'd saved in a year of work in Boston. By June, the valley was verdant and lush, the harsh memories of winter feeling like something from another lifetime. The herd had grown by 68 calves, and only 4 had been lost. A remarkable success rate that had even the skeptical neighboring ranchers acknowledging Caleb's skill. And Eliza's. "Mercer's wife knows her way around cattle," she overheard one rancher tell another at the general store. "Saw her handle a breech birth last month. Cooler under pressure than most men I know." The words filled her with pride that felt almost dangerous in its intensity. But success brought new challenges. The expanded herd needed more grazing land, and the ranch's current acreage was pushing its limits. One evening in late June, Caleb spread a hand-drawn map on the table. "This is our land," he said, tracing the boundaries. "And this," he pointed to a large section adjacent to their northern border, "is the old Peterson place. Been abandoned for 3 years since old man Peterson died. His daughter back east has been trying to sell it." "How much land?" "Another 120 acres. Good grazing, year-round creek, some timber. It would nearly double our capacity." Eliza studied the map. "What's it cost?" $800. Her breath caught. That was nearly everything they had saved, plus her sewing earnings, plus money they'd need for winter supplies. "Can we afford it?" "Barely. We'd be stretched thin until the fall cattle sale. But with that land, we could run twice the herd. Maybe more. It's a gamble, but it could set us up for real prosperity." "What do you think we should do?" Caleb looked at her seriously. "I think it's a decision we make together. I won't take a risk this big without your agreement." Eliza examined the map more carefully, running calculations in her head. They'd need to fence the new property, build shelters, clear some of the timber. All of that meant expense on top of the purchase price. But the potential return... "How confident are you that we can handle a bigger herd?" "With you as my partner?" "Very confident. Alone, I wouldn't attempt it. But we work well together, Eliza. We cover each other's weaknesses." She thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train 6 months ago, terrified and uncertain. That woman would have deferred to Caleb's judgment, afraid to voice an opinion that might be wrong. This woman was different. "I think we should buy it," she said firmly, "but on 2 conditions. First, the land title includes both our names equally. Second, we don't touch my sewing fund. We keep that as an emergency reserve in case the cattle sale goes badly." Caleb's face split into a grin. "Deal." They shook hands formally, sealing the agreement. Then he pulled her into his lap and kissed her thoroughly. "What was that for?" she asked when they came up for air. "For being exactly the partner I needed, for pushing me to be better, for making me want to build something bigger than just survival." "We're building it together," she reminded him. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." The purchase of the Peterson property transformed their lives in ways both exciting and terrifying. Suddenly, they had twice the land to manage, which meant twice the work. They spent long days surveying the new property, making plans for fencing and shelters, clearing brush from overgrown pastures. The old Peterson cabin, small and dilapidated, sat in the middle of the new land. Eliza stood in the doorway one afternoon, studying the sagging roof and broken windows. "This could be fixed up," she said thoughtfully. "Could be, but we don't need 2 cabins." "No, but we might need a bunkhouse. If we're expanding the herd, we'll eventually need hired help, especially during calving season." Caleb looked at her with something like awe. "You're already thinking 2 steps ahead." "Someone has to." She walked through the cabin, assessing damage. "The bones are good, foundation's solid. We could repair this ourselves over the winter when other work is slower. We'd need materials, labor. I can provide labor, and we can trade for materials. Your carpentry skills are valuable. Mrs. Patterson mentioned her husband needs a new barn door. Mr. Chen needs a chicken coop built. We trade work for lumber and supplies. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about a lot of things. She turned to face him. This ranch can be more than just survival, Caleb. It can be something significant, but only if we're willing to take calculated risks and work ourselves half to death. He crossed the dusty floor and pulled her into his arms. I didn't know I was marrying an empire builder. Neither did I. She rested her head against his chest. But it turns out I'm good at this, at seeing potential and figuring out how to realize it. In Boston, that ambition had nowhere to go. Here, it has purpose. Here, it has room to grow. They worked through the summer with renewed purpose, dividing their time between maintaining the existing ranch and developing the new property. It was exhausting, often overwhelming, but there was satisfaction in watching fences rise where none had stood before, in clearing land that would feed their expanded herd through the winter. Eliza's sewing business continued to grow. She now had a waiting list of clients and had raised her prices twice. The money went into improvements, better tools, quality breeding stock, materials for the bunkhouse renovation. In late August, they made the long drive to the railhead to sell their spring calves. Eliza had calculated they needed to clear at least $600 to cover their expenses and have enough left over for winter supplies and emergency reserves. The auction was tense. Caleb stood with the other ranchers while Eliza waited in the wagon, too nervous to watch. When he finally returned, his expression was carefully neutral. Well? She asked, barely breathing. $940. Eliza's vision swam. 900? Your calculations were conservative. The calves were heavier than average, healthier. We got premium prices. He handed her the bank draft, his hand shaking slightly. We did it, Eliza. We're not just surviving anymore. We're succeeding. She looked at the paper in her hands, at the numbers that represented 6 months of relentless work and sacrifice and partnership. Then she looked at Caleb, at this man who'd taken a chance on a stranger and built something extraordinary with her. We're succeeding, she repeated, together. That night, they celebrated in the small hotel in town, their first night away from the ranch since Eliza's arrival. They ate a meal they didn't have to cook, slept in a bed they didn't have to make, and talked late into the night about their plans for the future. I want to build you a real house, Caleb said in the darkness. Not just the cabin. A proper house with multiple rooms and real windows and a kitchen you don't have to share with the stove. The cabin's fine. The cabin's cramped. You deserve better. Eliza turned in his arms to face him. I don't need better. I need you, and I need work that matters, and I need to know that what we're building will last. Everything else is just details. Still, when we can afford it, we'll decide together, just like everything else. She kissed him softly. That's what partnership means, remember? Neither of us makes big decisions alone. Even when I want to give you something? Especially then, your wanting to give me things is sweet, but I didn't marry you for gifts or comfort. I married you for this, for shared purpose and mutual respect and the knowledge that we're building something that belongs to both of us equally. He pulled her closer. I love you. I love you too. They returned to the ranch in early September to find that their reputation had preceded them. 3 neighboring ranchers came by within the first week, asking for Eliza's advice on difficult births they'd had trouble with, wanting to know her techniques for keeping calves healthy through early spring. At first, Eliza was hesitant to position herself as an expert, but Caleb pushed her to own her knowledge. You've got skills they need. Share them. Build relationships. That's how we become part of this community. So she did. She taught other ranch wives what she'd learned about recognizing early signs of calf illness. She shared her methods for keeping detailed breeding records that helped predict problems before they became crises. She demonstrated her technique for assisting difficult births without panicking the mother cow. And slowly, grudgingly, the community's opinion of her shifted. She was no longer just Mercer's wife, or that large woman from Boston. She became the one who knows cattle, and the seamstress who does custom work, and eventually, simply Eliza. By October, as the leaves turned gold and the first frost touched the valley, Eliza stood on the porch of their cabin one morning and realized something profound had shifted inside her. She'd spent 26 years believing she was too much, too large, too ambitious, too different to ever truly belong anywhere. But here, in this vast Montana valley, working beside a man who valued her for exactly who she was, she'd discovered the truth. She wasn't too much. She'd simply been in places too small to contain her. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, coming up behind her with coffee. "About how far we've come. About how different my life is from what I expected." "Better or worse?" She turned to face him, this man who'd become her partner, her lover, her best friend. "Infinitely better. Sometimes I can barely remember the woman who stepped off that train. She seems like someone else entirely." "She wasn't someone else. She was you, just waiting for the right place to bloom." Eliza smiled. "You're getting poetic in your old age. You're a terrible influence on me." "Good." They stood together watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose, and Eliza felt something she'd never expected to feel in her life. Contentment, not the passive acceptance of limited options, but the active joy of having built exactly the life she wanted, with exactly the person she wanted to build it with. Winter would come again. There would be losses and setbacks and days when everything felt impossible, but they would face it together, as they'd faced everything else, as partners, as equals, as two people who'd gambled everything on each other and won. Winter returned to the Paradise Valley with the inevitability of seasons, but this time Eliza greeted it not with fear but with confidence. The root cellar was fully stocked with vegetables she'd learned to preserve. The barn held enough hay to feed the expanded herd through the coldest months, and the cabin walls had been reinforced with additional chinking that would keep out even the most vicious winds. She stood in the kitchen one November morning, her hands resting on her stomach where a subtle curve had begun to show beneath her dress. 3 months along, and she hadn't told Caleb yet, not from fear or uncertainty, but because she wanted to wait until she was sure, until the morning sickness had passed and the pregnancy felt real enough to share. The door opened, bringing Caleb in with a rush of cold air and the scent of pine and snow. "Storm's coming," he said, unwinding his scarf. "Should hit by nightfall. A big one, judging by how the horses are acting." Eliza's hand dropped from her stomach. "The new herd, are they secure?" "Moved them to the north pasture this morning. They'll have the windbreak and access to the creek." He paused, studying her face. "You all right? You look pale." "I'm fine. Just tired." He crossed to her, pressed his palm against her forehead. "You're not getting sick, are you? If you are, we need to get you to town before the roads close." "I'm not sick." She caught his hand, held it against her cheek. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." His expression shifted immediately to concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think it is." She took a breath, then placed his hand on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Sometime in late May, I think." The silence that followed felt infinite. Caleb stood frozen, his hand warm against her abdomen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly for her to read: shock, fear, wonder, joy. "A baby," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes." "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor, but yes, I'm sure." He pulled her into his arms so suddenly she gasped, holding her with a fierceness that made her ribs ache. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet. "I thought, after Sarah, I thought I'd never have this. Never have a family." "Are you happy?" Eliza asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" He laughed, the sound choked with emotion. "Eliza, I'm terrified and thrilled, and so completely overwhelmed that I can barely think straight. But yes, I'm happy. So damned happy." Relief flooded through her. "I was afraid you'd think it was too soon, that we weren't ready." "We're never ready. No one is." He cupped her face in his hands. "But we'll figure it out together, just like everything else. That's what we do." The storm hit that night with a fury that rivaled the blizzard from Eliza's first days in Montana. But this time, they were prepared. The animals were secured, supplies were stocked, and when the wind howled and snow piled against the windows, they sat together by the fire, making plans for a future that now included three. "We'll need to add a room to the cabin," Caleb said, sketching rough plans on the back of an old invoice. "Here, off the bedroom, big enough for a cradle and storage for baby things. And we'll need supplies, cloth for diapers and clothes, a proper cradle. I won't have our child sleeping in a drawer like some pioneer story." He smiled. "No drawers. I promise. I'll build the finest cradle Montana's ever seen. It doesn't have to be fancy. It has to be worthy of our child. Therefore, it will be the finest." Eliza leaned against his shoulder, watching the firelight play across his sketch. "Are you scared?" "Terrified. After what happened with Sarah." "I'm not Sarah." She said it gently but firmly. "I'm strong, Caleb. This pregnancy hasn't slowed me down yet, and I don't intend to let it. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We're built for this. Sarah was built for it too, and Sarah died of fever, not childbirth. There's no reason to think this will be anything but normal and healthy." She took his hand. "But I need you to believe that. I need you to have faith in me, in my body's ability to do this. If you spend the next 6 months treating me like I'm made of glass, I'll go mad." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm projecting my fears onto you, and that's not fair." "I didn't say don't be scared. I said have faith. The two can coexist." "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between the blizzard and the difficult calving season. Adversity builds character, or so I've been told." The storm lasted 3 days, during which they were trapped inside with nothing to do but talk, plan, and occasionally argue about ridiculous things like whether to paint the new room blue or leave it natural wood. By the time the weather broke, they'd made decisions about everything from birthing plans to godparents to what they'd name a child who wouldn't arrive for 6 more months. When they finally emerged from the cabin, the world was transformed once again into white perfection. The herd had weathered the storm well, losing only one old cow who'd probably been in her last season anyway. The barn stood solid and strong, the repairs from last winter holding firm. "We're getting good at this," Eliza observed, surveying their domain. "At surviving storms?" "At surviving everything." She turned to look at him, this man who'd become her whole world. "A year ago, I was in Boston, convinced I'd spend my entire life alone because I didn't fit the mold. Now I'm standing in Montana with a husband I love, a ranch I helped build, a baby on the way, and a future that feels limitless." "It is limitless." He pulled her close. "We can build whatever life we want here, make our own rules, create our own version of what a family should be." December brought bitter cold, but also the news they'd been waiting for. The deed to the Peterson property had been officially transferred into both their names equally. Eliza held the legal document, staring at her name printed in official black ink, Eliza Hart Mercer, co-owner. It was more than just property. It was proof that her partnership with Caleb was recognized not just emotionally, but legally. "Equal in all things," Caleb said, reading over her shoulder. "Just like we promised." Christmas arrived with none of the trauma of the previous year. They invited 3 neighboring families for dinner, and Eliza cooked a feast that actually turned out well. Roasted venison, potatoes, fresh bread she'd finally mastered, and a dried apple pie that had everyone asking for seconds. Mrs. Henshaw was among the guests, her attitude toward Eliza having softened considerably after seeing the quality of her work and hearing about her ranching knowledge. "You're positively glowing, Mrs. Mercer," she said, as the women cleared dishes while the men talked cattle prices. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." "It does." Eliza touched her stomach unconsciously. "And motherhood will too, come spring." Mrs. Henshaw's eyes widened. "You're expecting? Oh, my dear, congratulations. Your first?" "Our first." "Well, you'll need help. I insist on organizing a quilting bee. Every baby needs a proper quilt, and we'll have a barn raising in March to get that addition built before the baby comes." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. A year ago, these women had looked at her with barely concealed judgment. Now they were offering the kind of community support she'd never experienced in Boston. "Thank you," she managed. "That would be wonderful." As the guests departed into the winter darkness, promising to return for New Year's, Caleb wrapped his arms around Eliza from behind. "That went well," he said. "Better than well. They accepted me, really accepted me. Because you proved yourself. Not by being what they expected, but by being undeniably competent and refusing to apologize for it." She turned in his arms. "We proved ourselves. Together." The new year brought renewed energy and purpose. The addition to the cabin began to take shape with help from their neighbors, men and women working side by side to frame walls and raise a roof. Eliza had to fight to be allowed to help, everyone treating her pregnancy like a disability despite her protests. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she insisted when Caleb physically blocked her from lifting a beam. "I can help." "You can help by supervising and making sure we don't build anything crooked. That's helping." She glared at him. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You're treating me like glass. I'm treating you like a woman carrying our child. There's a difference." He softened his tone. "Please, Eliza, let us do the heavy lifting. You can do everything else, plan, organize, direct. But give me this. Let me protect you and the baby this one way." She relented, though not gracefully, and spent the construction period managing supplies, coordinating workers, and ensuring that every detail matched their plans. The room came together beautifully, larger than they'd originally planned, with a window facing east to catch the morning sun, and enough space for not just a cradle but also storage and a rocking chair Caleb built himself. By March, with the addition complete and painted a warm cream color, Eliza stood in the doorway of the nursery feeling almost overwhelmed by the reality of it. In 2 months, there would be a baby in that cradle. A child who would grow up knowing nothing but love and acceptance, who would never be told they were too much or not enough, who would learn from day one that they were valued for who they were, not who others wanted them to be. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she asked Caleb that night as they lay in bed, her growing stomach a solid presence between them. "What if you are?" "I'm serious. I don't know anything about babies. I'm going to make mistakes." "We'll both make mistakes. That's part of parenting." He placed his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move under his palm. "But this child will be loved beyond measure. They'll have 2 parents who respect each other, who work together, who've built something meaningful. That's more than most children get. I want them to be happy." They will be, because they'll see their mother being happy, not performing happiness for others, but genuinely fulfilled. That's the greatest gift we can give them. Eliza rolled to face him, awkward with her expanded belly but determined. "Promise me something." "Anything." "Promise that if this baby is a girl who grows up to be large like me, we'll never make her feel like that's something wrong with her. Promise we'll raise her to value strength over appearance, capability over beauty." "I promise. And if it's a boy who grows up sensitive or artistic or anything other than what society expects, we'll do the same. We'll raise our children to be themselves, fully and unapologetically." "Deal." April brought the crisis they'd been dreading. Eliza woke one night to wetness and cramping, far too early for the baby to come safely. Panic seized her as she shook Caleb awake. "Something's wrong. The baby, it's too soon." Caleb was up and moving instantly, pulling on clothes, grabbing supplies. "How bad is the pain?" "Bad. And there's blood." His face went pale, but his hands stayed steady. "We're going to town. Now. Don't move. I'll carry you to the wagon." The ride to Alder Creek was the longest 2 hours of Eliza's life. Every bump in the road brought fresh waves of pain and fear. Caleb drove like a man possessed, the horses pushed to their limits, his jaw set in grim determination. "Stay with me," he kept saying. "Just stay with me. We're almost there." The doctor in Alder Creek was an elderly man named Henderson who'd been delivering babies for 40 years. He examined Eliza with gentle efficiency while Caleb paced the hallway outside, refusing to leave. "Mrs. Mercer," Dr. Henderson said finally, "you've had what we call a threatened miscarriage. You haven't lost the baby yet, but you're at high risk. You need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. But the ranch will survive without you. This baby won't if you don't rest." He looked at her seriously. "I know you're a working woman. I've heard about everything you do. But right now, your job is to stay horizontal and let that child settle. Can you do that? Eliza looked at the ceiling, fighting tears of frustration and fear. I can try. You'll do more than try, Caleb said from the doorway. You'll do it. I'll handle the ranch. Caleb, you can't manage everything alone. I'll hire help. The neighbors will pitch in. But you are not risking this baby because you're too stubborn to rest. For 2 weeks, Eliza remained in the small hotel room Caleb rented, forbidden from doing more than walking to the washroom. It was torture. She could hear the world continuing outside her window, wagons passing, people going about their business, life happening without her. Caleb wrote in every evening with updates. The ranch was managing. He'd hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy work. The neighbors had organized a rotation to help with cooking and basic maintenance. Everything was under control. You don't have to lie to make me feel better, Eliza said one evening. I'm not lying. Things are harder without you, but we're managing. And more importantly, the baby's still secure. That's all that matters. By the end of 2 weeks, Dr. Henderson declared her stable enough to return home with strict instructions for limited activity. The ride back to the ranch was careful and slow, but when they finally arrived and Eliza saw their cabin, their land, their life, she wept with relief. Welcome home, Caleb said, carrying her over the threshold like a bride. I can walk. Doctor's orders, limited activity, that means I carry you. He deposited her gently on the bed, which had been moved to the main room so she wouldn't have to climb into the bedroom. The cabin had been transformed. Neighbors had clearly been through cleaning and organizing, leaving prepared meals and flowers in jars. They care about you, Caleb said, seeing her expression. About us. That's what community means. May arrived with warmth and wildflowers and finally, labor. It began gently on a Sunday morning, contractions that Eliza initially mistook for the baby shifting position. By noon, she knew. By evening, she was certain. Dr. Henderson arrived with 2 neighboring women experienced in childbirth, Mrs. Patterson and, surprisingly, Mrs. Henshaw. Caleb was banished to the barn, where he paced and worried while the women worked. Labor was long, brutal, and terrifying. Eliza had thought herself prepared, having assisted with difficult cattle births. But this was different. This was her body being torn apart from the inside, pain beyond anything she'd imagined, and fear that something would go wrong. You're doing beautifully, Mrs. Patterson encouraged, wiping sweat from Eliza's forehead. I can't. It's too much. You can, and you will, Mrs. Henshaw said firmly. You're the strongest woman I know, Eliza Mercer. You've survived blizzards and built a ranch and earned the respect of every person in this valley. You can do this. And somehow, impossibly, she did. As dawn broke on Monday morning, filling the cabin with golden light, Eliza's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to everyone's eyes. She's perfect, Dr. Henderson announced, placing the baby on Eliza's chest. Absolutely perfect. Eliza looked down at the tiny, furious creature in her arms, red-faced, dark-haired, fists waving with indignation at being born, and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. Get her father, she said. He needs to meet his daughter. Caleb burst through the door moments later, his face haggard from a night of worry. But when he saw Eliza holding their baby, his expression transformed into something transcendent. A girl? He asked, his voice breaking. A girl. Strong and healthy and absolutely furious about being cold and wet. He crossed to the bed, sat carefully beside them, and touched one finger to their daughter's tiny hand. She grabbed it immediately, her grip surprisingly strong. She takes after her mother, he said, smiling through tears. What should we name her? Eliza asked. They'd discussed names endlessly, never quite settling on one, but looking at their daughter now, only one name felt right. Hope, Eliza said, because she represents everything we hoped for, everything we built together. Hope Mercer, Caleb tested the name. It's perfect. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding and the particular chaos that only a newborn can bring. But they were also filled with joy, unlike anything Eliza had ever known. Watching Caleb cradle their daughter with infinite gentleness, seeing him sing to her in his rough voice when she cried, witnessing the fierce protectiveness he showed toward both his girls, it completed something in Eliza's heart she hadn't known was broken. By August, when Hope was 3 months old and Eliza had mostly recovered from childbirth, they held a party at the ranch to celebrate. Neighbors came from miles around, bringing gifts and food and congratulations. The women admired Hope and offered advice. The men talked with Caleb about the upcoming cattle sale. Mrs. Henshaw pulled Eliza aside at one point, bouncing Hope gently in her arms. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Eliza blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For judging you when you first arrived, for thinking you were somehow less because you didn't fit conventional standards. You've proven me wrong in every possible way. You're an exceptional woman, Eliza Mercer. This valley is better for having you in it." Eliza's throat tightened. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "And this little one," Mrs. Henshaw continued, looking down at Hope, "she's going to grow up knowing she's valued for who she is, not what she looks like. That's a rare gift. It's the gift I wish I'd been given. I'm determined she'll have it." As the sun set on the party, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold, Eliza stood on the porch with Hope in her arms and Caleb beside her, surveying their land. The herd had grown to over 300 head. The ranch was profitable enough that they'd hired permanent help. Her sewing business had waiting lists extending months into the future, and they'd just broken ground on the new house Caleb had promised. Not large or ostentatious, but solid and well-built, with room for more children if they were so blessed. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" Caleb asked. "When you first stepped off into the snow?" "Sometimes. That woman feels like a stranger now. She was brave, braver than she knew. She was desperate. There's a difference." "I don't think so. I think she knew exactly what she was doing. She was betting everything on the possibility that somewhere in this country there was a place she could be herself, a person who would see her clearly. And she was right." Eliza leaned against him, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "We were both right. You took the same gamble. Best decision I ever made." They stood together watching the valley darken as stars emerged overhead, countless and brilliant. Hope stirred against Eliza's chest but didn't wake, secure in the arms that held her. 1 year and 8 months since Eliza had stepped off that train, terrified and determined, everything had changed. She'd found partnership, love, purpose, and a place where her strength was valued rather than scorned. She'd built a life that didn't apologize for being different from what society expected. And most importantly, she'd learned the truth that had eluded her for 26 years in Boston. She wasn't too much. She'd simply needed to find a place vast enough to contain her, and a person brave enough to match her. Montana had given her that place. Caleb had given her that person. And together, they'd built something that would endure long after winter storms and summer droughts, something that would outlast temporary hardships and passing judgments. They'd built a home, a family, a legacy of choosing each other, day after day, through everything the world threw at them. "I love you," Eliza said softly. "I love you too." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Both of you. My whole world." Hope made a small sound in her sleep, content and warm and safe. And in that moment, standing on the porch of the cabin they'd fortified together, looking out over land they'd claimed as their own, Eliza felt something she'd spent her entire life searching for. She felt like she belonged, not because she'd changed to fit someone else's expectations, but because she'd found a place where being exactly who she was, strong, capable, ambitious, and yes, full-figured, was not just accepted but celebrated. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and sage and the distant mountains. Winter would come again. There would be storms to weather, challenges to face, obstacles to overcome. But they would face them together, as partners, as equals, as two people who'd proven that love built on respect and shared purpose could survive anything. And that, Eliza thought, as Caleb's arm tightened around her waist, was worth every moment of fear, every hour of backbreaking work, every second of doubt that had brought her to this moment. She'd stepped off that train into the unknown, carrying nothing but a small bag and enormous hope. She'd found everything she'd been searching for and things she hadn't known to dream about. She'd found home. And home, it turned out, wasn't a place at all. It was this, standing beside someone who saw you clearly and loved you fiercely, building a life that honored both your strengths and your struggles, creating something meaningful that would outlast you both. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant. The valley spread before them, dark and vast and beautiful. Hope slept peacefully in Eliza's arms, dreaming whatever dreams newborns dream. And Caleb and Eliza stood together, watching the night deepen, ready for whatever came next. Together, always together.